a decent.
Good morning, everyone. One of our big themes today is going to be how tech is changing cities, and it's very fitting that we're here in New Orleans, which has launched one of the most ambitious real-time monitoring systems in the United States. Chief Harrison, thank you for being with us. You were appointed by Mayor Landrieu, who we heard from last night, reappointed by Mayor Cantrell, and you rushed back from Kansas City to be here today. Could you please explain the scope of this program?
Thank you for having me. It's a very ambitious crime-fighting tool that we started a couple of years ago that actually launched last November. We had our one-year anniversary just last week. And it is a monitoring crime-fighting tool that has cameras laid out, city cameras on city poles in public areas that we decided to find out where crime was happening, violent crime, namely murder, robberies, and non-fatal shootings, where those incidents were happening over time. And then we got with our Office of Homeland Security under the mayor's office, and then we bought those cameras and placed them there while we built a real-time crime center. Those cameras have a live feed into that real-time crime center. And so we looked at other cities around the country that had that, and we wanted to have a robust system that helps us to prevent crime and to identify people who commit those violent acts. And so the first phase was in the downtown area on Bourbon Street in our tourist area. And then we looked at crime at locations over time and then put cameras, about 300 all over the city. And right now we just launched at our one-year anniversary another program called SafeCam Platinum, which allows citizens and businesses to opt in to buy their own personalized camera outward facing toward the sidewalk and street. That would be a live feed with a small monitoring feed, but would have a live feed into that real-time crime center, giving us the ability that when crimes are committed, we could actually see the approach of criminals, maybe capture those crimes in real time, or the egress of criminals out of neighborhoods. And we've been able to, number one, deter a lot of crime, displace a lot of crime, and apprehend a lot of individuals who committed violent acts and property crime in a way that we otherwise would not have been able to. So it's very, very robust, especially downtown here in New Orleans in our tourist area. It's been very beneficial, and it's helping us to reduce violent crimes across all categories.
Julia, you are a noted privacy expert, and you're starting a Markup, which is going to be devoted to investigating the impact of tech on society. What are your concerns about something like this? It sounds pretty good in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, you know, New Orleans, the U.S. is catching up with where London and Europe have been for a long time with a lot of camera surveillance. And, you know, I guess the thing I would say is that there's been enormous amounts of studies of surveillance and camera surveillance, in particularly in the UK, where they have a long history of it. And there's literally no evidence that it deters crime. It often displaces crime, so it can move it to another area of the city. And can help in solving crimes, but it does not act as a deterrent. And so so then it becomes a question of resources, right? Because you spend $40 million, I think, in New Orleans on this system, and you know there is a lot of evidence that things like working directly with the most vulnerable people who are going to be committing crimes. There's groups that I can't remember the name of them, but like where police officers really reach out to the community, that works, and having more cops on the beat. And so there are things that can deter crime. And the problem with surveillance as a deterrent is that A, it doesn't work, and B, it has the huge potential for, civil liberties violations. In particular, I very much worry about freedom of association, right? It's the First Amendment right that we don't think about as much, but it is so important because police have been using camera surveillance of protesters in particular, and not just camera surveillance, but also sort of cell phone surveillance through these things called stingrays, to identify protesters. This happened at Standing Rock. This has happened in other cities. And then we don't know what kind of consequences happen, and that deters people from their First Amendment right of speaking out and of dissent, which is so important to us.
Chief Harrison, you say that your system is not surveillance. So
Correct.
We have some, explain to us
It is
why.
not a surveillance system, it's a crime-fighting tool. And so we built protocols and put those protocols in place with measures of accountability to ensure that we're not using it as surveillance. And so while it is real time, when crimes are committed, the camera system is actually attached to the computer aid dispatch. So when a crime is committed, it populates and turns on the cameras within a 1 mile radius. And then the operators, which are only 2 or 3 at a time, are then able to look at and triangulate the area where the crime is committed so we can see the approach or the egress of a person allegedly who committed a crime. And so it's not used for surveillance, but it's only used as a crime fighting tool. And when we get those descriptions, we can then broadcast areas of concern, pathways and of ingress and egress, and we can get that to officers in real time. And so we even built systems of accountability where we are filming the operators inside the real-time crime center to make sure, because there are thousands of images that can be coming in, there's no way to really watch all of that at one time. And so it's only turned on and put in front of the operator when a crime is committed and that call is dispatched. And then we're monitoring the people who are monitoring to make sure that they're not abusing that. We built policies working with our consent decree monitor, because we're under a federal consent decree to make reforms, and with the city attorney to make sure those policies are really secure, they're really sound. And we've had advocacy groups to come in and tour, faith-based groups, academic groups, and other professionals to come in and look at what we're doing. And now many people across the country are coming to figure out how we did what we did so they can model it in their city. And it has, I would agree that when she said it doesn't always deter crime, but sometimes displaces it, because we are seeing that the violent crimes that were happening at strategic locations are somewhat not happening there, but maybe close by or somewhere else. But there is some level of reduction. With it being only 1 year in operation, I think it's really early to be able to say definitively.
Mm-hmm. Julia, the point of access and who's allowed access to this is really key. Is there a way to design a system that works? I know you've mentioned in Oakland, California, citizens have actually formed an advisory board. Is that something that would help allay concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two ways to think about this. One is citizen control, right? So in Oakland, there was a similar system was being put together called domain awareness that the city was trying to build a camera system monitoring the city, and the citizens protested, and they said, no, this is not right, and they actually created an oversight board, the citizen oversight board for surveillance. And that's a model that's actually been spreading throughout the country. And I think it's a really important model, because as we live in a world where everything is going to be able to surveil us, it's not just going to be cameras, it'll be the streetlights, and we're going to have our glasses will be surveilling each other.
Driverless cars with cameras.
Right, the cars have cameras, everything is going to be surveilled, right? So really, it's not even a question about surveillance or not, it's just a question of how and what levels of oversight. So I would say citizen control is a really important thing, but also I would just like to point out, like, what you're describing of it turns on once there's an incident is actually something we know already in policing. It's called the probable cause standard, right? So you have to get probable cause to get a search warrant, and that's what our historical model of surveillance actually relied on that. The problem is everything is just faster, right? So it's hard to go get a judge and whatever, but it is important to think about, we know how to do this, like, which is, let's have a standard that you have to meet and then have oversight of that standard, right? So I believe you that it turns on at that moment, but what is the civilian oversight or the judicial oversight to make sure that that's really true? And so that's the kind of question that we as societies need to face.
Mm-hmm. Chief Harrison, you've pointed out that you've heard not a single complaint from citizens here in New Orleans.
We have not. It's the very opposite of what you say Oakland may be experiencing. We're actually getting requests, if not every week, every day, multiple times a week, for city cameras to be put in neighborhoods. They're on city posts. They're only viewing public areas, streets and sidewalks. They're not internal. No sidewalks, no backyards, no side alleys. It's only public areas. And so citizens are asking for them. And we launched what we call Safe Cam NOLA Platinum, the opportunity for citizens to buy their own cameras to feed in. And literally thousands of people are interested in doing that. And there are no complaints from the citizens, overwhelming support and requests for us to enlarge this program. And while it started as a program to capture images of people committing robberies, murders, and non-fatal shootings, citizens now are asking for them for illegal dumping, for drug dealing, for just nuisance-related type issues in neighborhoods. And so while it is very expensive, they themselves are beginning to purchase those cameras through our Office of Homeland Security. And this is one of the protocols that we built in. It's not run by the police department. It's run by the Mayor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. It's staffed by the Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. And so there are no police employees operating the camera system or viewing the monitors. The Homeland Security staff is actually doing that, and they can feed information to us in real time. Only those who are authorized to enter the building can do it. It cannot be done remotely, and everything is uploaded to a police evidence cloud for police evidence only. Nothing can be downloaded to a compact disc, a CD, a DVD, or a thumb drive. It can only be uploaded to police evidence, which, of course, people like the district attorney would have access, and certainly the police department.
And is this, at this point, local officials? Could federal officials?
It is
ICE?
local. It is local officials. No, while we partner with federal agencies, they have to go through the Office of Homeland Security to get access for crimes that have been committed. They cannot come in to do any monitoring. It is only operated and managed by the Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness.
Does that make you feel more comfortable with this?
I mean, all of these things sound great. My question is always about oversight and accountability and audits, right? So who's making sure that that's true? And so I feel like what is happening is we have like a very clear system about that in sort of the offline world of like the probable cause, and then you knock on a door with a warrant and all that. And we have a system where we understand how that works, who gets to say it's okay, and what kind of accountability afterwards, whether you can challenge that warrant in court, which you can. And this is a situation where it's totally outside of those rules, right? And so I think what we face as a society is building that new set of rules. And I think you guys have done a great job. One thing I really appreciate is data minimization. So I believe it says on your website that you delete the videos after 30 days unless they've been attached to a case. So that's a good standard, but these are standards that are voluntary, right? And what we know about voluntary standards is that they often get eroded over time. I mean, even the NSA, which has entire teams of privacy and compliance lawyers, which I'm sure you don't have as many as they do, you know, there were some things that they were doing, which we learned about in the Snowden files, that were not, you know, appropriate to the Constitution, it seems.
Chief Harrison, you were describing an example backstage of how this has worked recently. You haven't seen necessarily reduction in crime yet, perhaps not even a deterrence, but it is helping you solve.
Well, we're seeing reductions in crime in just about all of our violent crime and most of our property crime areas. And the Real-Time Crime Center has been a very good crime fighting tool to help us build those quality cases. And yes, a number of cases are coming to us where we have digital video evidence that shows that a particular individual either committed or participated in a certain crime at a certain place at a certain time. And we otherwise would have had to present that with either eyewitness testimony or some other type of evidence. And so the citizenry of America, the citizens in America are now demanding police to wear body cameras, and they're okay with that. Everybody has a cell phone, and they're okay with everybody filming everything. And when it comes to the technology, for those of us that own an iPhone 10, you're absolutely okay with somebody recognizing your facial expression because you paid for it and bought it, you're okay with it. But I think sometimes it becomes a double standard when it comes to law enforcement, what's expected of us. But I think the one example I can tell you, it was a murder not too far from here where the cameras actually captured vehicle driving up, subject getting out, entering a parking garage. Something happened in the parking garage which we believe was a drug deal. The subject exited the garage, and we later learned that a murder occurred in a parking garage. We were able to see the vehicle, get a description. We were able to take a still photo out of the video of who we thought what the perpetrator was, bring that to our local media who brought it to the citizenry while we asked the citizens to help us identify this person. Within a day or two, citizens were giving tips of who that person was, the car, and we were able to make that case. Now that case may not have gone, it may have gone unsolved had it not been for digital video. And so it was really high definition, and we were able to clear that case within a few days. Otherwise, it could have taken months, it may still be unsolved. That's just one case. And so that's how we are able to go to surviving victims or the family of victims and tell them, yes, justice is served, and yes, we're doing our part. And you know, otherwise, we're consoling victims for days, weeks, months, and years on end because we can't solve a case because we lack the tools necessary to be able to do that. And any chief or sheriff or law enforcement executive in America who does not have this is living in the dark ages, and they're working far behind the times.
Julia, the chief mentioned facial recognition. This is all happening really before the widespread adoption of facial recognition. Microsoft and other companies, other tech companies have come out and asked for regulation of facial recognition. How Is this just going to deepen concerns about privacy when it happens? The person in that parking garage, they will know who that is?
Yeah, I mean, we are on the cusp of a complete revolution because facial recognition is finally ready for prime time. It never was. And one of the things that consoled me and other people who worried about these things was like, well, okay, there's cameras everywhere, but at least there's not facial recognition yet, right? And now it kind of is available, and it's getting ready for prime time. And the first people who want to adopt it are going to be law enforcement. I would point out there is a difference between what Apple does on your phone, which is that facial recognition never leaves your phone. It's encrypted on your phone, and so it doesn't transmit anywhere, right? Apple doesn't have its own database of faces. Now, Facebook does, and that's another question we should talk about. But, but the problem is law enforcement is so excited about the use of facial recognition, and we don't, as I said, have the legal structure right now. And so, of course, yes, who doesn't want to identify the murderer? But then, is it going to be used to identify the protesters? And then what about when it starts moving into illegal dumping, and then you start to, like, your neighbors who are nuisances? And it's a very slippery slope until you're in a world where you have no ability to be anonymous. And I think we have to think about what that world would be like and whether we want to live in it, because it's something we've taken for granted, that we have a little bit of anonymity until the time in which we do something bad. And then, of course, yes, okay, cops are after you, they get a warrant, cool. But like before that, you're okay, right? And that's not going to be the world we're going to be in like 4 minutes.
But once again, this is all, and first of all, that's right, but this is all in public areas where there's no expectation of privacy on a public street. There's no expectation of privacy on a public street, and so we're not using it in any private way or on any private property. And we are advocates for everybody. I'm the chief of not only the members of the department, but every member of this city. And so I have to advocate for everybody. And there are two groups. There's the group who are not surviving victims of violence, and there are groups who are surviving victims of violence. I have to advocate for both groups. Mm-hmm. And so you ask a person who has not lost a loved one to violence, who believes in this privacy thing, they're going to have one opinion. You go ask a person who's a victim of violence or has lost someone to violence, it's a totally different thing. And I think we're headed to the point of America asking itself, how bad is bad? And how bad do we have to get? And how many lives have to be lost? How many people have to get hurt before we equip ourselves with the tools to try to prevent that?
Right, and the question is, what's the right tool to prevent that? Because there's a lot of people out there doing, I think the program I was trying to remember the name of is Ceasefire, right? Where there are other ways to try to prevent violence. And honestly, the murder clearance rates in low-income Black communities in this country are abysmal. They're embarrassingly low. And we should all be ashamed. And I don't know that technology is the reason for that. I think there's a lot of legitimate lack of trust, right, between the police and the communities that they oversee, and that has to be repaired. And is surveillance the way to repair that trust? That is a question I think is an open question.
Mm-hmm.
She makes a good point, and we're working on that here, especially with this federal consent decree. We've done a 100% overhaul of our police department and are now kind of leading the nation in reform. So building community and sustaining community trust is very important. But with the national conversation about policing and police shortages and manpower shortages, all of us are facing the need to have to now use some level of technology to offset the number of police officers we are not getting and the lack of interest in young people wanting to have a career in law enforcement. And so it is happening in the business world, it's happening in the academic world, where everyone in every discipline uses some level of technology because there's a lack of people coming into the workforce or that human element to be able to accomplish those goals. We're certainly facing that across the country. And the expectation of the citizen now in court is, I'm not relying on the officer testimony. Every question now is, did you record it? And unfortunately, it's only believed if it is recorded. Some years ago, the officer's testimony and the eyewitness's testimony is really all we had. But now, the citizens, all of us, kind of expect DNA, fingerprints, all of the things, video, all of the things that are available now to secure convictions or to make sure we got it right. We've worked with the Innocence Project here in the city and trained all of our detectives on how to make good cases that don't get overturned by not just relying on the human element, but but using the resources that are available, DNA, fingerprints, video, digital video, and not just relying on eyewitness account, which from time to time we found can be faulty. So that, number one, we don't have cases that get overturned, and we can prevent our department from ever creating that kind of scenario.
I'm going to open it up to questions in just one moment, but Julia, the chief mentioned DNA.
Oh, I thank you for asking. I was about to jump in.
And there was just this fascinating case of the California killer where there are some privacy issues cropping up, genealogy, DNA, and where do the lines begin and end there? Do you have, DNA seems like, as the chief says, he needs evidence, and it seems.
Right. There's a difference between evidence, though, and surveillance, once again. And so, like, I think DNA as a form of evidence is one thing. But if you think about, there's a trend across the country that one of my colleagues wrote about it with me, and it was something called stop and spit. So, there's stop and frisk, but there's also communities of police now using stop and spit to collect DNA in advance, right? So they need a big pool, because once you have a crime, you have the DNA, but how are you going to match it? You need to get all your citizens' DNA in advance to build that database. And so there's actually kind of a race going on where all these local jurisdictions are trying to build their own DNA databases and asking innocent people to just contribute to it in advance, like that you will be a future criminal. And this is the kind of thing that our laws don't envision, right? We don't have a sense of whether that is a good idea or not, but certainly stop and frisk was viewed basically, it was ruled to be a disparate impact on minorities and ended. And so I think that stop and spit is likely to be that too. And so it's all about the question of implementation. Can we do these things right?
Are there any questions? In the second row there, the mic is coming. If you could quickly identify yourself and.
There's a mic.
Oh. Can I hold it? No? Okay. Mia Lear, I'm an urbanist landscape architect in Los Angeles. Gun control didn't come up.
Such a good
And
point.
coming from a state that has pretty forward-thinking laws, I'd like to know what you think we could be doing about it.
Good question. Chief, where's your position on gun control?
First of all, we suffer from a lot of gun violence here in New Orleans. We're known as sportsman's paradise. And a lot of people are getting guns illegally. And they're getting them in different ways, and they're using them in crimes of violence. And I think we need to be much tougher on people who are carrying illegal guns and using those illegal guns. There is a correlation between those who carry illegal guns or carry them in an illegal way and using them, and those persons becoming victims of gun violence themselves are the perpetrators of gun violence. We've studied that for years. That's no secret. But we need to be tougher on those individuals and the decision to carry a gun in an illegal way. We're not talking about sports or recreation. I've said this all across the country, and I'll say it here. The decision point to use a gun is not at the point where the trigger is pulled. The decision to use a gun is when the person walks out of their home with it. When they decide to leave home with it, they have resolved that they may have to use it, and have resolved that they will if they need to. We have to change that thinking through consequences, through education, to prevent people from making the decision to think they have to illegally carry a gun. Because at the point they find that they use it, they will use it, more often than not get themselves hurt or killed or become a perpetrator of gun violence. And so yes, all of us need to be tougher on it. And when we look at places like New York, I believe it is a very hard, determinate stance on a person caught illegally carrying a gun. That's not like that in many other places. And so, they're afforded the ability to have lower non-fatal shootings and murder rate because of the laws about carrying guns in that state. Certainly we struggle with that here, but we're trying to change an entire culture of why people think they even need to carry a gun.
We have time for one last question, if there is one. Well, I'd like you to join me in thanking Chief Harrison.
Oh, wait. Oh, is there something?
Oh, I'm
Hello,
sorry.
It was me. Hello, my name's Jan Orvet. I work with Mobility out of Stockholm, Sweden. I had a question about the camera program, where individuals can purchase their own cameras, and also the cameras are going up from the city. At what level, at what point should those cameras be taken down, pulled back? What is the acceptable level of crime for the cameras to be removed?
Well, very good question. The citizens are asking for the cameras by and large for everything. It started, the city camera started on public poles, public areas for violent crimes over time, namely murders, non-fatal shootings, and armed robberies. Now the citizens are seeing crime reduction and are liking the cameras and are asking the city to buy more and put more up, even for property crimes and nuisance crimes like illegal dumping, drag racing, and speeding. They're asking for all of that every day all over the city. We had a program called SafeCam NOLA, which is a database where citizens who had cameras on their property could register with SafeCam NOLA, and when a crime is committed, we could contact them and ask their permission to view the footage. The evolution of that we launched earlier this week, called SafeCam NOLA Platinum, allows citizens to buy cameras that have a live feed into the real-time crime center, and those will capture everything that happens, but it's outward facing toward the street. And so the citizens have really embraced it here and are asking for them for far more than we envisioned, which would have been violent crime. They are, you know, the cars are getting broken into, cars are getting stolen, dumping, people damaging their property. Those cameras are capturing those crimes, and we're able to make quality cases based on the apprehensions and the positive identifications of those perpetrators. And the citizens have really embraced it. So at what point do they get pulled back? Here, the citizens are asking for more of it, and they are certainly willing to use those cameras for property crimes and nuisance crimes.
And Julia, just to wrap us up, citizen support is positive, but you would say oversight is still required.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, I think like if you think about displacement of crime as the main benefit of these cameras, obviously it's in every citizen's interest to displace the crime from their own individual space. And so this is the question of the individual good versus the collective good. So yes, everyone, I probably would advocate for it too. If everyone else had one, right, then I want one too, because then I'm going to make sure that the crime doesn't happen in front of my house. But is it good for the collective good of society to spend millions and millions of dollars on this and not on, you know, maybe more restorative justice types of approaches?
I'd like you to join me in thanking Chief Harrison and Julia for a fascinating discussion.